95 Sports. Ross Dellenger, Sports Illustrated, joins us now. And Ross has been in Scottsdale. Never a bad place to be, but working hard and breaking news as he always does. Ross, I would think that when you go there and you're kind of in the midst of it, do you get more clarity or less clarity on what's going on with the Pac-12?
Well, there's an argument to be made that you get less clarity. There are a lot of things swirling there. You've got a lot of sides to this. Obviously, you've got the network side, multiple networks involved. You've got obviously the Pac-12, and you've got the conference trying to poach Pac-12 members, the Big 12. So you got all these different parties to this situation, and it can get pretty cloudy. And all those parties were there, and so you can sometimes get a better idea by talking to all of them, but sometimes you can also confuse yourself by talking to them. So it's a murky situation, and honestly, it's a situation that I've tried my best to stay away from because there's so many parties involved, there's so many agendas involved, and there's so much unknown by everyone except really the commission of the Pac-12 maybe, and his executive presidents, and maybe a network executive or two. So you're talking about 5 to 7 people.
So Ross, I mean, you're right. It's such a weird and a fluid thing, and it just depends on, I think, a lot of times what people want to believe. So, like, whether it's this report or that report, like this is what fits their narrative, and that's what they want to believe. But just in general, for the crowd that says there is nothing to this, this is all a bunch of baloney and fake headlines and all that. Do you feel like this is blown out of proportion, or do you feel like this is something that, while it's nothing imminent, there is cause for concern, if you will, for certain parties?
Well, certainly the Pac-12 thought it would be done quicker than this, sooner than this. They thought this process probably would go a little quicker. I mean, they were gearing up at one point to announce a deal the week of the football championship, and that's the first week of December. You're talking about 5-6 months ago. And then there was, reports, and I think some presidents actually came out publicly and said it, that they would announce a deal at the end of March, maybe at their conference basketball tournament mid-March. So those things just never happen, and now I think it's the deadline kind of shifts now again, and I think it's probably by the end of June, maybe my media days, which is in mid to late July. So this is definitely concerning at how delayed and how that timeline continues to push and push. And I think that timeline continues to push for a variety of reasons. One, the Big 12 got to the market first, and they got their deal done. It's a credit to Brett Yormark, who has been incredibly progressive, aggressive, in creative. He has. He's come in, and he's kind of others in the college sports world would call him a disruptor. He comes in, he shakes up things, brings kind of new ideas. Deion Sanders, I think, in the coaching level would kind of be classified as that as well.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it's certainly, the Pac-12 certainly has some concerns. He's talking to a Pac-12 athletic director who preached cohesion, and all 10 of us are together, we support each other. And then he finished the conversation by saying, "But I'm getting a little tired of waiting."
Yeah, that's
always that's the pesky butt.
Yeah, that's the razor's edge they're walking on now, because Ross, it really only takes one school to say, "I'm sick of this," and then chaos ensues.
Yeah, that's usually how realignment stuff works, right? It's usually one or two schools create a domino. In this situation, that's never been truer. You've got a league that's fairly unstable, a league that it's two of its top 3 kind of most valuable properties will be gone after next year. USC and UCLA, in its biggest market, LA, will be gone. next year. So it's about, I think, estimates are around 30 to 40% of the overall value of the conference. Some would say even more than that. So your two big dogs are gone, and that leaves you at a really susceptible position where if you have one or two more gone, you might see, a possibility of a complete collapse. And that's where they got to hold everybody together, right? It's very important.
Ross, just what sense do you get? And I'm not trying to I know that there's other things that you wrote about that are very interesting that I'd like to touch on as well, because there's a very busy week outside of just that one report or that report on the Pac-12 and the Big 12. But what kind of sense do you get just sort of looking as a guy who's very thorough around the entire landscape? Yes, this Pac-12 thing is going to eventually end, but does that mean a period of peace and calm, or do you feel like everybody's as agitated and nervous as ever, save for, those who have an ironclad future like a Big Ten or an SEC?
Well, I don't know that anything will be stable these days, no matter what. But certainly after the Pac-12 deal gets, I think you have two lanes here, so to speak. You have one lane is the Pac-12 gets a deal done that is suitable for its members, and it remains at 10, probably adds one or two more, so any other state, maybe SMU. And so that's one lane, and everybody, the Mountain West, I don't know that the Mountain West is going to scramble to really replace one team. I don't know that the American will scramble. In this lane, there's not going to be a lot of dominoes. UNC Conference USA add a team or two. It may be the American, but there won't be a lot of dominoes in that lane. It'll be more stable. Lane 2 is, somewhat chaotic because lane 2 would be the Pac-12 deal isn't suitable for its members. And 2 to 4 of them go to the Big 12, and then 2 to 4 of them go to the Big 10, probably at a lesser share because they will be somewhat in desperation mode. And then you have basically around 4 or 5 schools left that go their own way and maybe independence for some, maybe it's down to the Mountain West for others. And then once that all would happen, and this is all obviously speculative, but if the Big Ten is going to grow, does the SEC grow? And does anybody out east challenge the grant of rights in the ACC, which is in a kind of a cruddy situation? So all of that I just described is certainly speculative, but all of it is, I think, a possibility. And if it's not a possibility this year, given the Pac-12 deal, if it's not as suitable and it starts breaking apart, then I'm going to tell you this thing that I just laid out, it's going to happen. It's just, is it going to happen the next, in this year, or is it going to happen in 6 to 8 years, or is it going to happen in 14 to 15 years? Because it's going to happen. I think Jack Swarbrick at Notre Dame AD has said multiple times the current situation in college sports where you have two leagues, the SEC and the Big Ten, so far money-wise above the rest, it can't continue down the path. So you're going to see more and more consolidation.
Ross, some of the other things that were going on is, you talked about the Big 12 and how they've, want to modernize the broadcast of the football games, in-game interviews and all that. How do you think the coaches will take that?
Well, they're a tough lot to convince, but if anybody's going to convince them or just tell them what they're doing, it is Brett Yormark. And I think that was discussed at length in the coaches and ADs joint conference meetings on Tuesday and Wednesday in Phoenix, Scottsdale. And so, I think they're going to move forward with those plans. They have to talk to the network. There are a lot of I's that need dotted and T's crossed, but it's a cool idea. And it's one, I should say, that isn't necessarily revolutionary. I think that you're going to see college football playoff games have a lot of this stuff. You're going to see maybe other conferences jump aboard as well. But it was discussed at length in the Big 12, and it's something, Yormark and I talked about this actually in Scottsdale. It's something that probably should have happened with college football years ago. And sometimes it takes somebody from the outside to come in and do it.
What are your thoughts on the layout of the college football playoff that we got a glimpse of this past week?
Well, it's exciting. For the people who don't agree on the playoff and are against the expanded playoff, every other NCAA sport that the association sponsors, softball, baseball, hockey, etc., usually has in its postseason. It usually includes about 10 to up to 20% of its overall teams are included in the postseason. And for years and years, football has been at 1%. And then with the expanded 14 playoff, it's at 3%. And that number just needs to rise. And so now with the 12-team playoff, it's at that 9 to 10% range. And that's certainly, more suitable and makes a lot more sense and will give a lot more programs and conferences, leagues, a better shot. And I should say this plays into realignment as well. The six highest ranked conference champions get an automatic entry into the playoff, and those top four conference champions get buys. So again, if you're what we were just talking about, if you're in the Pac-12 and you're Washington or Oregon, with a Pac-12 that's without USC and UCLA, why would you want to go to the Big Ten? Well, money. But the second thing is you got to think about championships. And I think, gosh, there's so much of an opportunity to do that in the Pac-12 than the Big Ten. And maybe the same for some of those schools like Colorado and Arizona. They have a better shot in the Pac-12 too, really, than they might in the Big 12. So that's something that everybody has to think about as well.
Ross, I'm of the belief that after the first 2 years of the college football playoff, we'll see, I don't want to say a major shakeup, but you'll see a big shift in the way that teams are approaching how they get there once they figure out kind of what the shortest cut is. Don't you think?
You mean like as far as scheduling?
Like scheduling, the way they approach kind of the way they expectations, the way they maybe start funneling NIL money more into things, all of that.
Yeah, we're going to learn a lot from those first 2 years. It's going to show us a lot, and schools are going to learn. And what we're going to see probably beyond the first 2 years in the future is a revenue distribution model that is going to be it's going to be more about merit. The CFP distributes to each conference a certain amount of money. It's kind of an equal distribution. You get a little more here and there if you have more teams make the playoff. We're going to see the equal distribution go a little more unequal. And we'll probably see more distribution based on how far and how many teams a conference has in the playoff. So it's something to keep in mind. That's just more money you can do those things like NIL and all that other stuff with. And then scheduling is going to be important. You saw really 4 to 6 years ago, teams start to schedule differently, a little more difficult, right? They're adding more Power 5 non-conference games. They're adding more conference games. So you're seeing that already change, and it'll keep changing in the future. It'll keep evolving as they figure this thing out.
So Ross, I guess there's the constant realignment talk. There's Brett Yormark and just what all he's up to. There's there's no shortage of things. Is there anything we didn't touch on that you think is like a major point of discussion for college athletics right now, or is that pretty much the gamut? Besides the overall existential crisis that they've continued to face for the last few years with the government and whatnot.
Well, I think the new NCAA president Charlie Baker and what his future plan is for the NCAA and the survival of the association is certainly interesting. And he was up here. I live in D.C. and he was up here last week back on the Hill, meeting with lawmakers, trying to get a congressional bill passed that will more standardize and regulate and maybe enforce NIL. And that's certainly a big topic. And if they get that congressional bill, I think it'll probably might even save the NCAA as an association. If they don't, then there's certainly issues going forward.
Yeah, I don't hold my breath when it comes to Congress ever, Ross.
Yeah, don't do that.
No. Ross Dellenger, SportsIllustrated.com. Ross, thanks so much. I hope you did you get some time to at least kick back and enjoy Scottsdale a bit, or were you just riding and working the whole time?
I got in my pool, my Airbnb pool, for about 20 minutes. That's about it.
Well, I hope it was 20 glorious minutes, Ross. Thanks for hopping on as always. Love to have you.
Thanks, y'all.
Yeah, Ross Dellenger, SportsIllustrated.com. Yeah, he was